It is September, and I can already feel the frost kicking in. It's coming. It's coming. Is this always been? Oh yeah, you've all recorded. I'm sorry. Welcome to September. My name is Robert. I am one of the leadership members of the Spokane Homeless Coalition. If you are new and this is your first time, welcome. Thanks for being here and spending an hour with us out of your day each month, and those who have returned, thank you so much. And again, if this is your first time at the coalition, we are geared to provide you an educational platform of things that are happening in our community. We offer opportunities to advocate for certain things that are happening in our community. We are here to gather together, sharing and networking, resources, and all of the above. So I want to thank you so much for the investment of time and dedication that you come each month and support this and keep up to date with things that are happening in our community as it relates to those experiencing houselessness. So, we are going to go ahead and jump right in. So I'll have my guest speakers come on up, Mr. Gavin and Nicolette. Thank you to our guest speakers for taking the time. Each month we try to give a little time as a reflection and spend some time grounding ourselves and preparing ourselves for each month that comes. I love that these meetings happen at the beginning of the month. But this month, I have no reflection, so we are going to jump right in and, oh, you have the microphone. Okay. So, for those of you who are new to the homeless system, and for those of you who are not and are serving those who are disenfranchised population and just experiencing circumstances that go beyond them and family systems and everything that ties into homelessness. We are kind of at a pivotal point. Each month we've had conversations related to a regional collaborative approach to homelessness. I imagine first discussions were related to the Houston model is what kind of the narrative that was sparked within our community. And then now it's become a public development authority. And then now we just keep having these transitions where everything keeps evolving. And but what has happened recently is interlocal agreement that was submitted from Spokane Unite, and we'll dive into how things are progressing and evolving right now. There were some concerns that were related to, if you think of like the stages of change, pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, there were some concerns related to the preparation stage of this massive change in our system. And you as frontline service providers and Experience Matters have voiced your concerns of this massive change and impact in our homeless system, and which created a resolution from this. It wasn't last Monday, it was Labor Day, right?
It's the 28th month.
Oh yeah, 28th, okay. And so we're gonna jump into some questions and answers. We'll leave some time for the audience to ask questions as well. But Nicolette, can you kind of tell us a little bit about that 28th resolution that happened, maybe some main points about it, and you feel free to give historical context if I missed something.
Yeah, okay. So, on the 28th, Council voted on a resolution that was, and Rob started, I forgot. The previous resolution that the other jurisdictions were voting on and that had been deferred from council previously was essentially saying that the Spokane Unite Group, which is also the Spokane Regional Collaborative, there's been some rebranding here and there, would basically be able to have access to staff and data so that they could enter into this next phase by October 15th. And what we had heard, council had heard from the service providers is that that date felt unrealistic, and that the level of outreach that they hoped to achieve and the level of input they wanted in the documents that had been presented on June 28th just wasn't there. And so council put together a resolution of their own that, in their words, kind of put up some guardrails, I think is the way that Betsy usually describes it. Some things that they wanted to see happen before they could really move forward with any kind of regional authority. And one of those things had to do with whatever data that the Spokane Unite or Spokane Regional Collaborative Group got, council wanted. Unfortunately, there has been a history of council asking for a certain kind of piece of data and not achieving it. And I think that too, for somebody like Councilman Cathcart, who is very transparency and all of that is really important to him, is the public being able to have access to that data as well. When you're giving a group an unprecedented level of access to staff and data, the idea is that the public should also have that, right? And so that piece was in it as well. There's a piece of this of wanting to slow down and making sure we're doing it really methodically. And even though there was a little bit of pushback, in my opinion, on the resolution itself, I think that the city of Spokane has a higher proportion of the funds and the staff that they're putting into it. And so they had to set up some barriers to participation to make sure that we're doing this the right way, at least from their perspective. The resolution that was deferred originally and that was indefinitely deferred in virtue of this one going through, it's possible that that would have failed on the dais, and not because they don't support a regional collaboration, but because the mayor had already issued an executive order, so it kind of seemed redundant, and because the October 15th deadline again seemed untenable for most. One of the other reasons why they wanted to pass this resolution was to get those community letters in that document, in the packet, because we did receive letters from the CHHS board, the COC board, the Homeless Coalition, and Experience Matters Spokane. And it was important for council to take all of those concerns very seriously moving forward. And so, did you want me to get more technical or anything?
No. Real quick, just by show of hands, how many of you do not know what we're talking about? That's okay. That's completely okay. And again, if this is your first time, this is a massive change to the homeless system. We're basically consolidating a lot of resources. This is a very short cliff note version. And so we're just trying to ensure that there's boundaries and safeguards in place to ensure that this all lands in a safe spot. So going to Gavin here. Thank you, Nicolette, for that the resolution that was passed. But from the context of the Spokane Regional Collaborative, right? The interlocal agreement and the charter principles was the executive summary, basically, of the charter was all submitted, which resulted in what took place. Can you explain kind of not next steps, I don't want to get to that yet, but kind of the feedback that you have gotten from that initial interlocal agreement and charter that was submitted by Spokane Unite at the time?
You bet. So, just to step back, the notion behind all this is just to have a regional approach to homelessness where you don't have boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries, other types of boundaries, and you have kind of a central area where it's being run centrally, so that everybody's working off the same strategic plan, the same information, the same data, and it's following a model that we saw in Houston. Just to put in context, Houston, 6th largest MSA, we're 97th in the country. There's a lot of dissimilarities between Houston and Spokane, obviously, but when you talk to Houston, they're the lowest per capita, homelessness rate in the nation of any metropolitan area. And so if you look at Spokane, we have 10 times the rate of homelessness of Houston. And it's kind of a remarkable statistic. Spokane is in the top 10 homelessness rates in the nation right now. So we obviously have a situation that is really challenging. But when you go to Houston, and everybody's going to Houston now because a lot of cities are experiencing this problem, and the prior three-term mayor, Denise Parker, the current mayor, Sylvester Turner, and all the people that are running their centralized organization are getting inundated with people coming there and saying, how are you doing this? How is this happening? And they're really quick to point out there is no single program, there's no multiple programs because every city is different. The only thing they do that's different than other cities, and they say this over and over again, people struggle to believe this, is they do collaboration, and they lately have taken to calling it, in quotes, deep collaboration. And it's nothing different than what all of us do with our friends, with our family, and the community, where we find ways to work together really efficiently and really effectively. So it's just about working together. And so in the city of Spokane, we have this outstanding homelessness response system. But like most cities in America, it's not designed to work together. In fact, you have it broken out in various jurisdictions. You actually have it can be guided by the continuum of care, by the county, by the city of Spokane, and all the surrounding jurisdictions, all kind of doing their own thing. And Houston insists that that's the problem. It's not a lack of funding. It's not that the response system itself isn't of high quality. It's that it's not working together and not collaborating properly. So I just wanted to put that in context because that's what we're talking about, just that very simple notion. So getting back to the documents that Robert alluded to that we presented on June 28th to bring that together, you need a vehicle to have that happen. So in Houston, they don't get any local tax dollars. And that probably doesn't surprise you. Knowing what you know about Texas, they're not funding homelessness at all. Well, about each homeless person experiencing homelessness in Houston and in Texas generally gets about 1/10 the dollars of what other states are providing. So they're not doing it with more money from the local jurisdictions or from the state. But what they are doing is with cooperation. But in their case, they use a nonprofit called The Way Home, and it's a regional homeless coalition that is called The Way Home. And it's a nonprofit. They're not using public dollars, and they can use a nonprofit. And in many cases, they're getting private dollars from large philanthropists, they're using a lot of federal leverage that we don't use here, and other things. But they have a nonprofit. We set up something called a Public Development Authority, is what we're suggesting. It's been used for numerous special purposes locally. It's a creature of a statute here in Washington State, and it's just a way of organizing any kind of activity, typically economic activities, in this case, responding to homelessness. And so it's called a Public Development Authority. And so that's something the electeds are comfortable with because they've done it before. It allows you to put together a board of directors. It allows you to have certain statutory capabilities in terms of funding, in terms of leveraging your funding and other things. But there's nothing particularly special about a public development authority, and in many ways could be compared to a nonprofit. We're using a public development authority because it involves the electeds of the jurisdictions. And the reason for that is most of our money is coming from the city of Spokane and the county and through federal sources through the continuum of care, which Robert is a co-chair of. And so we're using public dollars, and hence we're using a public entity. So that just kind of gets us past this kind of wonky term, public development authority. Then we set up an interlocal agreement. We drafted and we worked with a number of attorneys to put together an interlocal agreement, which is how you put together a public development authority. And then we did a corporate charter also. Now, where we got in trouble, I think, is, we're really just setting up the vehicle for coming together and collaborating, as I said. But we also put out a number of principles. And the principles ranged from recognizing the quality of the homelessness response system to recognizing that all people experiencing homelessness deserve the care, the services, a roof, etc. But also mentioned as a last resort that incarceration remained a tool within the arsenal that is responding to homelessness. That has been absolutely an inflammatory principle that was placed out there on so many levels. And it's been interpreted to say the response to homelessness should be incarceration. Absolutely not. And it was a last resort item, and it's recognizing the political spectrum that we're dealing with here, because we can't make this work without the left supporting it, and we can't make it work without the right supporting it. And yet, I think what we've recognized is by putting any principles out there at all, we got ahead of ourselves. And in so doing, we allowed a conversation about how we're going to address homelessness instead of what we're going to set in place to allow the right people to come together to address homelessness. So I just want to say right off the bat, one of the things we're doing right now is redrawing the corporate charter, the draft charter, and pulling those principles out. Because it's not my place. A lot of people I'm working with in Spokane tonight, it's for the new entity to come up with their approach and their principles to doing this, and all the providers themselves that are part of that system. So those will just be eliminated, all of them. We're not going to pick one or pick two. I think there were 10 principles. All of them will be removed from the corporate charter. They can be amended, brought back in, or like a lot of organizations, they don't actually have underlying principles as a part of them. You know, the new organization can decide that at a later date. So that's one shift that will happen. One of the guiding principles, even though we're removing those principles, is no politics. And so the governance of this new organization, we do have to define. And so we're sticking to that. We're actually lowering the number. We're going to revise and lower the number of electeds. Our recommendation for the electeds on the board down to 4, and increase the number of non-electeds to 9, including a tribal representative that wasn't in the original representation. And to be clear, these are our recommendations that we're bringing forward. We're a nonprofit group. At the end of the day, we have to get at least 4 votes from the city council. We have to have the Spokane mayor supporting this, or we'll need 5 votes in the council. We'll also need a majority of the Board of County Commissioners. And because it's regional, and we've had a lot of support across the region from other jurisdictions, but we've got another, I think, 8 or 9 jurisdictions that we hope will get on board also. Most of them have passed the resolution allowing us to go in and do the normal due diligence of looking at the numbers, looking at the employees, etc., so we can understand what the new organization would look like. But at the end of the day, it's basically just saying, let's take the homelessness response system out of the city of Spokane, let's take it out of the county, and to a lesser degree, because the other jurisdictions are less involved in homelessness response, get it out of there also, put it in this central organization, but have them have some really direct accountability to the jurisdictions that are creating it. So it's this kind of balance of getting the politics out, but also maintaining accountability to the political structure that's creating it in the first place, and providing the resources that we need to have an effective response. It's a delicate dance, because you have on the left certain jurisdictions, on the right certain other jurisdictions, and if we don't get the votes from every one of those, we don't succeed. So that's kind of where we get whipsawed a little bit. But I think by removing the principles and then being really sensitive on our idea of what the governance would look like, making sure that we're adhering to keeping the politics out, making sure that that recommendation has far more non-electeds than electeds on the board. Now, I don't know if you want me to talk about
I actually want to steal the mic away from him for a minute. Give it a breath. Just tell you. Nicolette, and thank you for those changes and revisions. As we seems like voices have been heard with addressing those concerns. But Nicolette, what do you, and this will be a question for you too, with these revisions, what, like, with a little, engaging a little foresight, what do you feel like the implications politically are gonna occur with these changes that Gavin just mentioned? Like, you know, mentioned like the county, the administration, council, just kind of a general, like, do you think they'll be in favor? Do you think there'll be pushback? What political gain is there? What political loss is there?
Well, I think that ideally it would be great to get politics out of this, but I kind of think it's impossible, you know? I think that at this point, it's managing what that political power structure looks like. And I do think that it's good to have a board that has fewer elected officials than non-elected officials to make sure that people who are the subject matter experts have more of that voting power to try to remove some of those politics. But it will be a political sort of fight regardless of everybody's going to want multiple seats with their elected officials on there, right?
Why?
Well, I mean, I think the part of it is power and control, right? I mean, that's just, it's very hard for anybody in any system to give up power or control over something. They have an idea about how they want their money spent. They have an idea about how, you know, the strategies that are in place and all of that. And when you're talking about joint jurisdictional stuff, and you're talking, the county's gonna wanna have more commissioners than council members. And we've seen this fight happen in our community a million times, right? Even with the health district and moving from 3 commissioners to 5. And there's always gonna be this power struggle. And I think that it's important for the community, and they've done that, you guys have shown up, to say, okay, let's try to remove politics. We realize it's going to be there anywhere, but let's try to make it a little bit more of a fair system. The ask for a tribal representative had been happening all along. So it finally making it to the top and being integrated, I think is critical. The guiding principles too, the pushback was happening from day one, from June 28th when that was first put out. That was on everybody's mind. Now that that's made that up and being taken seriously, I think that's great. So you are seeing some, I think, political leaders, sort of rest a little bit easier knowing that there is some collaboration happening, but there is going to be this power struggle regardless of how many seats are at the table. And then we just as a community have to make sure that we're not letting their egos get too inflated when they're trying to make those kinds of negotiations. I was actually surprised to hear that the smaller cities didn't want their own seat. That every single smaller city that we had heard from in one of those meetings said, you know what, we're okay just having one representative representing us all. And I think in a lot of ways that shows a lot of, it's a good characteristic to have to say, you know what, I'm gonna give up my vote, or I'm not gonna ask for a seat on my own because I believe that I can trust somebody who will represent us all, and they just wanna be, a part of this rather than not being a part of it. And so I think that we can learn more from the smaller cities about giving up control to somebody who can make those kinds of decisions, and respect, their wishes in virtue of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Now, Gavin, where do you think that, like, power, like, going off of what Nicolette mentioned, where do you feel like that power and control is coming from? Like, where is the, I guess if it's a power control scenario, right, there's personal gain, right, associated with that. Where do you feel like the personal gain is politically for those individuals who are either for or against or keep playing this ping pong match with this public development authority?
Yeah, I agree with Nicolette that the politics are going to be there, and we actually want them there. I mean, if you had the new organization tomorrow, one of the first calls they would make is to the city and to the county to adjust zoning and regulatory rules to allow more housing in the city of Spokane and drive the prices down. So we have to have a really great partnership with the city and the county, and we need accountability to those elected leaders too. So when I say get the politics out, I'm mostly talking about getting the subject matter experts, all the providers and the people that actually know about how to address homelessness, getting that subject matter expertise to the front, where they're leading. And that's who you want running this organization. So the CEO has to be somebody that's got all the trust across the provider community, but can also interact with the political organizations and jurisdictions. So it would be a unique individual that has both those political skills, which we need, and will always need those political skills and political support, and then also then is able to leverage the knowledge and the resources and the employees of the new organization, which they are providers. So the strength of this new organization at the end of the day is a combination of the providers themselves, the workers in the organization that are, that are actually homelessness response individuals, and then leveraging the political system and the business environment and others to bring the resources that we need to accomplish the goal here. So it's really, we've expanded the name originally from a homelessness authority, homelessness PDA, to a homelessness, housing, health, and safety. It's not that we want to control in any way the budgets of the safety, the police, fire, sheriff's office, etc., or in any way control the housing, but what we do want is to have a very strong voice in how safety interacts with the homelessness response system, and how housing policy is made so we can address the approximate 25,000 deficit we have in housing in Spokane, which is one of the worst in the nation. That's why the prices are going like this, even as wages are remaining stagnant, is because we have a supply problem. So we have to address that. So we need that political support going forward.
And just kind of transitioning a little bit to board composition. I know that was, you mentioned the numbers, right? As far as board composition, as far as who's kind of selected to be on that board, or what type of, status or power that individual has within that realm that they're identified in, what type of individuals need to be placed on that board? Because I know for me, right, my voice can only echo so far within the Providence halls and healthcare system. So it's not like if I was placed in this presumed position of power on this board, I wouldn't necessarily be able to make the changes that may be required to address the whole picture. So what does that board composition look like from an individual standpoint?
It's a really great question, and it's great coming from you, Robert, because he's actually directly involved. So Robert's co-chair in the Continuum of Care. That's the go-between between HUD and our community, Housing Urban Development and our community. So one of the other changes we're suggesting is that the Continuum of Care, Mandy Chapman Semple is a person who has a long background in homelessness response, but she was also the architect for the Houston system. So it made sense to us to hire her right away and help put together our recommendations. So she's been on retainer with us for about the last year, but she recommended that we have an advisory group to the governing board. And that advisory group, she designed it specifically to meet the HUD requirements for a Continuum of Care board. And the hope is that the COC would then become the advisory board to the governing board. And that would really kind of get back to that one-stop shop for the entire regional response. I'm going into that right now because one of the other recommendations then is that the chair of the Continuum of Care board will sit on the governing board. So in this case, if that rolled forward, Robert, you as the co-chair of the Continuum of Care would sit on the governing board also to maintain clear communication between the COC to the governing board, and then also you have a lot of other outreach. And that gets back to your base question of where do you have significant authority and persuasion to move resources and to move support towards this regional organization, because we need resources and support. So in that case, in that position that you represent, you would have that significant authority and power in the areas of the COC, our relationship to housing and urban development, the HUD, and in that, bring that to the organization. In the other positions, public housing. So it's obviously, you look to like the Spokane Housing Agency. In that case, the chair or the CEO of that is Pam Parr. She would be the kind of person that we would say, please consider going on this board, which will not be an easy board and will require a lot of hours. Would you be willing to consider being on that board? And you go down that list, we probably will recommend that this process we're going through, Nicolette's a part of it. We've asked Robert also to be a part of it. We meet on every other Thursday, but we'd like to meet on a weekly basis going forward to speed things up. But it's 2 city council members, it's a representative from the mayor's office, it's 2 from the county, it's 2 from the valley, and small cities, as Nicolette said, all coming together to talk about how to move this forward. That group that I've just described, we'd like to put out 3 names in each of the categories for the electeds to consider, because again, we're accountable to the electeds. So in the area of business, we would love to put together 3 names that we think could help bring business support to the regional organization, and then let the electeds decide on which of those 3 names they feel good about. If they don't feel good about any of the 3, then send it back and get another set. But I think it'll shock everybody that when we come up with this group, I don't think people are going to disagree about it. I think they're going to see these are all really good people that represent those areas Robert alluded to. So there's one for business, there's one for public housing, there's one for private housing, there's one for philanthropy, there's one for mental health, there's one for medical health. So you can imagine if we need resources and authority over the medical health area, we will probably go to the CEO of Multicare or Providence, or a recently retired CEO of Multicare or Providence, as the large organizations that can help us shift our relationship through the regional organization to the medical health community. Likewise, you have the same kind of outreach in the mental health area, and so it goes. And we'll be reaching out to a lot of you to help us formulate what those recommendations will be, and we'll bring them up through that Thursday group, and then send it off to the electeds if they agree that's the approach. But there's layers and layers of politics along the way to get to even those recommendations to be accepted by the jurisdictions. And so that's something we're still working on.
You want to expand on that, Nicolette, at all? As far as there's potential, it sounds like, of us being a comment box for this group. totally joking. But
Yeah, I almost want to ask you a question, Robert. One thing I've heard in the community a lot is how are these board members going to, the non-elected, board members, going to be appointed? Is there going to be an application process? Who nominates them? Or are they going to be appointed from the outset? In the document that we received on June 28th, there was kind of that chicken and the egg problem that we discussed, which is, the board selects the CEO, the CEO selects the board, but which comes first, right? And in the community letters that were in council's resolution, one of the things that did come up was the selection of the non-elected board members. And I think for a while, the community has been asking, well, how does that happen? Are they gonna be appointed? Is it gonna be an application process? And then we did receive some feedback on suggestions of how that should go. And so, I guess, can I ask you a question, Robert? How do you feel hearing that the elected officials would be the ones to make those first appointments with the non-elected members of the governing board?
This is the first decision. For me, and again, I do co-chair the COC with Ariel Anderson with the Housing Authority. So again, we'd probably flip a coin on who would kind of sit in that. But that's a tough call because I think if the intention is to utilize the COC, and again, this would have to go through the COC board as the advisory committee that's already in existence, it's hard for me to see beyond utilizing a system that's already in existence to vote and to choose and go through that application process with the knowledge that they have, I think is untapped well. But to just solely go off of the electeds, I think it's They can be at times the blind leading the blind. They don't have all the information that they would need, and they would just be kind of going off of potentially word of mouth, or potentially, those advising them on who they should vote. So my preference is to use a pre-existing system that's already in place, to have those safeguards around a collective board and body of knowledge that's familiar with the homelessness system. Would probably be my preference.
Yeah, and I think that just along those lines too, when we're talking about power struggles and politics, if you only have 4 electeds, you've got one from the county, one from the city, one from small cities, and one from the valley, then there will be a fight internally with the council and the mayor's office on who's going to be that person, especially if that person gets to make a decision on who those non-elected members of that board are. And so I don't know the best answer to that. I just do know that the community's probably looking for a definitive answer on how that's going to go. And it's hard. I'm glad I'm not the one that's making the decision at the end of the day.
We could always take a poll on the Spokane Homeless Coalition. Barry could probably draft a poll to see what your voices are, right? Because it's ultimately going to impact us as service providers on how those decisions are made and who those seats are granted to. It should be a privilege on both ends. Yes, we want to very much endorse certain individuals who are experienced in those specific fields, but it also has to be a commitment on their end that they're wanting to make lasting impacts and changes. So I think a poll that experience matters would be able to report out on Barry.
Can I ask the folks sitting in this room, it's going to be the leadership team, Robert, me, Rob, Christy, Julie, creating that poll. Is that something that is of interest to you? Would you like a poll going out saying this regional board is going to be created? Do you want it to be elected officials appointing this board, or do you want, I'll say, the COC? I use the COC as an example right now. Or is it a group like Continuum Care appointing that board? Is that an interest for you to respond? Would you want to respond to a poll like that? Please raise your hand. Yes. All right, we'll do it.
Okay. Then I guess I'll answer your question with a question. So now that we're kind of progressing down this road, what do you think the implications are on this current political campaign season that's going on? Do you think we're kind of in like a limbo with that to see like what kind of implications does this massive regional authority have on the political campaign landscape right now?
I think that the first thing that just kind of hit me, which is what I'll go with, is when I went to Houston with our current mayor to learn what they were doing. There's excellent, what is his name? I can't remember his name off the top of my head. The mayor of Houston. Sylvester Kern. Amazing person. I mean, just really incredible. And one of the questions that came up was, how do you create a system that can sustain the election cycles, right? And he's like, the biggest thing is you can't tie it to one person. When you tie it to one person, then that's where you get into trouble. And I think one of the pieces of really successful things that Houston did is they did make a system that can survive those election cycles, that everybody, whether they're left, right, or center, can get on board with, because it wasn't tied to a political party, it wasn't tied to a specific leader, it wasn't tied to Denise Parker even specifically, right? The system itself was designed by the people who would be utilizing the system to make their jobs more efficiently so that they could be the ones to provide better services for the vulnerable population of people that they're serving. And I think that's the key piece here, is to keep the politics out as much as possible, is to lift up group like the Homeless Coalition here in Spokane, the way that Houston did, where they took their homeless coalition and they basically lifted them up and gave them all of the tools that they needed to succeed and be functionally that governing body, right? And so, I mean, otherwise, I don't think I can comment too much, without getting in trouble with my job.
Gavin, same question. You're retired, you can say whatever you want.
I think, unlike Houston, we're handing a lot of public dollars over to Public Development Authority, and so I think we're kind of coming up with a hybrid model which allows us to come up with a list of names. And the funny thing is, I mean, we can do polls, we can do other things, but I think when we come up with a list of names, I think we can walk into this group or almost any group and not have significant pushback. I think everybody's going to be really pleasantly surprised that the nominees that roll forward are going to be largely supported by just about everybody. They're going to be the kind of people you would expect that would say yes to donating probably many hundreds of hours of their time to push forward an effective homelessness response system and make it successful. And almost by definition, these people on this list, I think there won't be a lot of debate. But at the end of the day, allowing the electeds who are fundamentally responsible for this system and its success moving forward, they have to have that voice. And I don't know that we have any great choice in that, but I don't think that's a bad choice either. I will say that, this kind of very bumpy road, every time we hit a bump, including the significant changes on the city council resolution versus the one that we submitted, the response to that is people coming to me, many people, and saying, "Are you about done? Is that the end of this? Are you fed up? Is this whatever?" And when we left Houston, we were told by Mark Eichenbaum, who's the guy that's running out of the mayor's office, and we were told this by Sylvester Turner, the current mayor, the prior three-term mayor, Denise Parker, and others, Tal Costas, that runs Search, the biggest nonprofit in Houston. And they all said, when we kicked this off 10 years ago, there were full-page ads run by many of the providers and others fighting every step of the way, including Tal Costas herself, who we were talking to. And they ran ads saying no, just say no to this new approach. Because, as Robert said at the outset, it's a really significant change, and we know we all resist change. I do. And they said, just stay with it. Keep communicating, keep talking. The strength of the system are the providers themselves. That's where the knowledge is. And just keep going back, be willing to adjust your course as you go, which we're trying to do, and just keep moving incrementally and getting the buy-in as you go and build trust, but just keep it moving. Now, we did set that October 15th deadline. That was more or less for Rick, Teresa, and I as volunteers to try to put kind of an end date on our volunteer activities. We're each of us a couple thousand hours deep in the volunteer time, and we're kind of running out of steam a little bit. But the electeds are going to do what they need to do and do the due diligence they feel like they need to do to make good decisions. And far be it from us to say they're the best, they know what they're doing. And they're going to take as much time as they need to make good decisions. And the October 15th date is just for us to get into the city, to get into the county, put together the numbers, put together the flow charts of how data is flowing, put together the employees that are involved in what they're doing, so that as they reflect on what the new organization will look like, they'll know what assets, what personnel, what data, capabilities, and other things they're going to be dealing with. They need that information to move forward. And so we're just basically workers at that point, and so that was what the resolution was about, just to get in and be able to do that work and hand it off to the folks that need to set this up.
Thank you, and thank you for your time that you've given to this massive project. Okay, so now we're going to take some questions from any ones. I saw this hand go up first from the audience. So if you have some questions brewing, ponder it. Let it sink in.
Thank you. I have a statement and a question. So my statement is that in that original presentation in July, the actions taken, the words used, really took a step back for us as a community in tying homelessness and criminal activity together, rather than recognizing that our unhoused community are some of our most vulnerable and in the most unsafe situation. So I just want to speak that was very hard. My question
I
is.
just interrupt and apologize for that. That certainly wasn't the intention, and I have an absolute understanding that was a clumsy use of language that gave that impression, and I think we're all feeling deeply apologetic for that slight.
Please represent that with a public apology. Not in this room. If the people in this room understand that, it's our community that had took that and it just added to and weighed upon the stigma that was already present and the racism that was already present. So if you mean it, back it up with a public apology, please. My question is, have you began to put forward names for these positions on this board?
Could you repeat the question? Have we put names forward? No. I mean, other than anecdotally saying that, for instance, Pam Parr would be a good example because she represents the public housing agency here in Spokane, but it would be good if I talked to Pam Parr about that first. So, in other words, we're giving a couple of examples in the very abstract sense. These would be the kind of individuals we're talking about, because, and in her case, it's really obvious because we have that public housing agency. But no, not yet.
2 more questions.
Hi, more so, Tammy with the Health District. More so in regards to the board recommendations and that email. I just feel in all fairness and transparency that those names that are recommended, there should be an application to go with it that also goes out to the general public for individuals interested in board seats on this approach.
Thank you. I don't see a problem with that at all.
Last question. Oh.
There was a paper published by Eastern Washington University, and the title is called Compassionate Revanchism. This is what's fun about these meetings is people don't know how to pronounce all the words. But Compassionate Revanchism and the role of private sector coalitions in the spatial management of houselessness. Has anyone on this coalition read this paper? I'm wondering if there's any comments to what they speak about in this.
I have, and I think it's a great paper. It covered a number of different cities, but it mentioned Hello for Good in particular as a coalition of private businesses working on an issue that I think made some very good points, but very outdated. Hello for Good, I think, represented some political positions on homelessness that I believe would be unpopular here early in their existence. Their last public forum, I think, reflected kind of a shifting sensibility. It brought a national expert to talk about the 16-bed limit on Medicare beds, and is really getting into the details about how we can get past that federal funding Medicare cap and thereby provide many more mental health beds. It was a wonderfully presentation that was very detailed and helped us move forward. And I think whether you're left or right, you'd find that to be a very good topic, and they paid a lot of money to bring the right person into town to talk about that and help us roadmap how to move forward. That's probably not the Hello for Good they were earlier in their existence. And so I think we have to kind of recognize the evolution of that organization along the way. So I think it was a great paper as it regarded the Hello for Good. I think it's just outdated, but made good points.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our guest speakers and the time and commitment that you have. I understand that there's going to be aches and pains with this transition and process that we go through, and so everyone, you're doing a great job with patience and understanding that we will rejoice in the suffering of this process. But thank you again to our guest speakers. And right now we're going to transition. Oh yes, definitely give them a round. And you guys can go. grab a cup of coffee and a pastry. So now Barry is going to lead us in a time to reflect on the upcoming winter season. Barry.
Thank you, Robert. I don't know what this is going to look like. When our last leadership team meeting, we talked about this being part of the agenda, and we also said, well, you know, the first frost is October 6th. That's 30 days away. And at least my experience is, gee, we're all really surprised. Well, we are not surprised. I guess the community, it seems like the community, well, there's no collaborative regional response to the winter experience for homelessness, right, Gavin and everybody else here? There's no regional approach. There's a lot of very individual, like I got the responses to some of the questions I put out to the coalition, and I put those back out yesterday afternoon of what some individuals are doing, what some agencies are doing, and what they're thinking of doing in the future. I don't have an answer. I'm bringing this to you today. Do any of you have a, I guess what I'm bringing here is I'm hoping that there will be some kind of individual group that will come out of this today and say, we want to address this. We want to try to maybe put a voice out there, make it something bigger than just an individual response or individual entity response, like not just UGM and not just Family Promise and not just VOA, but try to think, and not just the city, you know, not just the county, because often we, at least I think, well, why doesn't the city do something? And I was like, well, okay, I shouldn't be just sitting around waiting for the city to do it. So please stand up and speak. And Robert, did you take the microphone? Oh, it's up here?
Behind you.
Oh, here it is. I'm just asking, folks. Come on. What are we going to do? Go ahead, Robert. You take him the microphone. I'm going to stay up here so the video sees at least a human being up here when they're watching the video.
Everywhere in Westminster, we always have a barrel out to get like hats, gloves, and stuff to try to keep people warm. And we'll probably do that again this year.
Okay. Yeah, my response is there were a lot of individual things. Great. That's good. Let's do those. Encourage those. I guess I'm wondering, does this coalition have something bigger that we can do? Julie?
In street outreach, we could utilize a lot of help in getting life-saving gear to people experiencing homeless throughout the county. We will be putting out an article to the coalition this week, Maurice and I, about the data that we've been tracking for the last 3 months in providing 24/7 outreach. And just to give you some numbers that we have come up with is, in a 10-day period this month, we have touched hands with over 4,000 people experiencing homelessness, living unsheltered in our county. That's more than will ever fit into the track shelter. That's more than will fit into our shelter system. And those folks are going to die outside this year if we don't get them some kind of life-saving gear.
So am I right in saying it sounds like Jules Helping Hands is going to try to ramp up through volunteers more street outreach during the winter? Okay, good. There's a hand up over there.
Hi, Hallie with Compassionate Addiction Treatment. I've got more to ask for collaboration and support. So CAT has operated emergency warming shelters every year since we opened in 2019. We're a service provider providing SUD treatment, MAT services, and a safe warm space during the day. So every year that we do this, it flips our work upside down and impacts us for weeks following this. It impacts us horrifically financially because we can't provide services while we're also providing an emergency warning center. So I just want to reach out and see if anybody would be willing to support us, if the church would be willing to work to help provide safe space, so we could shift it out of our service space and into a space that wouldn't be impacted financially in the way that we are every year. We do this without much financial support at all, and we are really a small nonprofit with a very limited budget, and we just really are calling out. We could really use help in this area. We feel really kind of alone in it.
So what I heard there is that this direct service provider and probably others you ramp up. During the winter, there's more needs. You're trying to meet those needs. You're trying to get volunteers. You're trying to do your regular services you do year round, but extra in the winter. So you're asking, will someone step up and maybe help provide a warming space and help augment your staff so that those extra things can be done? And I'm suggesting, if that's correct, maybe every one of you might be making that kind of an ask. Allie?
It's a little bit more than that. We actually end up doing overnight 24/7 shelter where we have people sleeping wall to wall on our floors. So I really want people to understand that, like, that's what's happening at our building. And we do it because there isn't any other option, but we're really asking to lean in. If local churches could help, it would be amazing.
My opinion, the trench shelter, the track shelter, if it is open during the winter, is not going to be enough to house and keep warm those who need it. So, kind of what Allie is saying, is there someplace else, somebody else, some other groups that can and I'm sorry to kind of point a finger at the city, but the city works so slowly and the county works so slowly. So if this is going to happen in the next couple months, I think it's going to have to come from us. Just my suggestion. Anybody else? Did I see a hand from Lisa? I saw a hand from Lisa.
Yes, I'm just going to suggest that this coalition is very.
Wait, get the microphone, because our video people aren't hearing
Sorry,
you.
thanks, Robert. Sorry. This is Lisa Brown. I'm going to just suggest that this group is very powerful, and we just had fires in this community. An emergency response was set up immediately, and the county and the city were involved in that. And this is the same kind of emergency. And so I do think, in addition to putting out a call to churches and others that might have spaces, that there should be a call to county and city leadership to come up with something in advance of the first frost.
Yeah, of course. You might sense some cynicism from me in that effort that has happened every year, but yes, do that. It's almost 10:30. Anybody else want to make a comment or suggestion? Oh, yes.
Hey guys, my name is Johnny Edmondson. I'm with Shado Park Presbyterian Church and also a movement called Growing Neighbors. Anyways, I feel like there's a ton of space in church buildings across the city. I just think a lot of churches are like fearful of like ruining or hurting this space, sadly. But I wonder if there's like, some significant funding source or whatever who like will help you. Like bring beds in, clean up if there are problems. Just some way to get over that hurdle. Like the space is there. It's literally everywhere. There's a ton of space. You just need to get over that fear bit and just like knowing there's some support beyond the limited resources in the congregation.
Okay, I don't mean to put you on the spot. So will you now be willing to contact all the churches in the area and ask them to do that? Because, and I'm not asking you to do that, but when I mean, there's so many great ideas here. It's like somebody needs to just step up and say, okay, I'm going to take that on. I'm going to personally call or somehow visit or show up at the door of every church and, try to make that idea really happen.
I would love to be part of that. I can't just quit up all my other responsibilities and take that on. But I will be part of it if there's a team that wants to be part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's time to end. It's 10:30. So if anyone wants to be part of that team, what's your name?
Johnny Edmondson.
Johnny Edmondson, right back there. Go form a group around Johnny Edmondson and get every church in this county to open up and bring people in so they're not freezing out there. Thank you for being here. See you next month.